Jerusalem just took a direct hit from one of the most advanced weapons in Iran's arsenal, the Fattah hypersonic missile, a weapon system that travels at speeds exceeding Mach 15, maneuvers unpredictably during flight, and cannot be reliably intercepted by any defense system currently deployed in the Middle East. And it reached the Israeli capital. Not intercepted, not deflected. Direct impact, multiple strikes confirmed across the city, buildings damaged, casualties reported, infrastructure hit. And the weapon that delivered this destruction represents a technological threshold that fundamentally changes the strategic calculus of this entire conflict. Over the next few minutes, you're going to see exactly what makes the Fattah hypersonic, why no current defense system can stop it, and what Iran striking Jerusalem with this weapon means for the future of warfare in the region. Before we continue, thanks for tuning in. Your support keeps this channel going. Please subscribe and like this video so more people see this analysis. Now let's break this down. On April 6, 2026, Israeli air defense systems detected multiple hypersonic missiles inbound from Iranian territory. The trajectories were unlike anything the network had tracked before. Erratic flight paths, mid-course corrections, terminal velocities exceeding Mach 15. Aero interceptors were launched, the missiles engaged, but the combination of speed and maneuverability made successful intercepts impossible. At least 3 Fattah hypersonic missiles successfully reached Jerusalem. One struck near the Knesset, Israel's parliament building, causing severe structural damage and igniting fires across multiple government buildings. A second impact hit the western outskirts of the city, damaging residential areas and transportation infrastructure. The third confirmed strike landed near critical communication facilities used by Israeli military command. Emergency services reported over 200 people wounded across the 3 impact sites, with at least 12 confirmed dead. The casualty numbers are still rising as rescue operations continue. But the human toll, as devastating as it is not the most strategically significant aspect of what just happened. What matters most is that a hypersonic weapon reached Jerusalem, and Israel's most advanced air defenses could not stop it. Let's talk about what makes the Fattah hypersonic, and why that distinction is so important. The term hypersonic refers to speeds above Mach 5, roughly 3,800 miles per hour, but speed alone is not what defines a hypersonic weapon in strategic terms. Traditional ballistic missiles also reach hypersonic speeds during their re-entry phase. What makes the Fattah different, what makes it a true hypersonic threat, is maneuverability at hypersonic speeds. The Fattah uses what's called a hypersonic glide vehicle. After the missile's booster stage separates, the glide vehicle continues on a depressed trajectory, flying lower and faster than a traditional ballistic arc. During this phase, the vehicle can make lateral adjustments to its flight path. It can turn, it can shift altitude, it can change direction in ways that traditional ballistic warheads cannot. And it does all of this while traveling at speeds between Mach 13 and Mach 15. For a defense system trying to intercept that threat, maneuverability at hypersonic speed creates an unsolvable problem. Interception relies on predicting where the incoming object will be in the next few seconds and placing an interceptor at that exact point. If the target can change direction unpredictably during flight, the prediction fails. The interceptor arrives at the calculated intercept point, and the target is somewhere else. Israel's aero system is one of the most advanced ballistic missile defense networks in the world. It has demonstrated high success rates against traditional threats. But it was not designed to handle targets that maneuver at Mach 15. The engagement timeline is too short. The flight path is too unpredictable. The closing speeds are too high. When the Fattah missiles approached Jerusalem, the aero system attempted to engage. Interceptors were fired, but the missiles adjusted their paths during terminal descent, and the interceptors missed. That is not a failure of Israeli technology. That is the inherent limitation of current interception systems when confronted with maneuverable hypersonic threats. No country on Earth has deployed a defense system that can reliably intercept weapons like the Fattah. The United States is developing hypersonic interceptors, but they are years away from operational deployment. Russia and China are working on similar programs. But as of right now, there is no effective countermeasure, which means every missile Iran fires with this system has a very high probability of reaching its target. Now let's talk about what the Fattah carries and what it can do when it hits. The warhead on the Fattah is estimated at 500 to 650 kilograms of high explosive. That is not as large as the Khorramshahr 4's 1,500 kilogram payload, but it does not need to be. The Fattah is not designed for area devastation. It is designed for precision strikes against high-value targets, command centers, government buildings, critical infrastructure, leadership compounds. The accuracy of the system, combined with its ability to penetrate any defense, makes it the ideal weapon for decapitation strikes. And Iran just used it against Jerusalem, the political and symbolic heart of Israel. That is not a random choice. That is a message. The message is simple. No target in Israel is safe. Not Tel Aviv, not Haifa, not Jerusalem, not even the most heavily defended locations. If Iran wants to hit something, it can hit it, and there is nothing Israel can do to stop it. This fundamentally changes the strategic equation. For decades, Israel's security has relied on two pillars: military superiority and defensive technology. The assumption was that even if enemies launched attacks, Israel's defenses would intercept most threats, and its military would retaliate with overwhelming force. The Fattah breaks the first pillar. It demonstrates that defensive technology, no matter how advanced, cannot stop every threat. And if you cannot stop the threat, the only option left is deterrence through retaliation. But retaliation creates its own problems. Because if Israel escalates in response to hypersonic strikes on Jerusalem, Iran escalates further, and the weapons available to both sides keep getting more destructive. We are watching the emergence of a strategic environment where offense has outpaced defense, and neither side has an incentive to de-escalate. Here is where the cost equation becomes critical. The Fattah hypersonic missile costs Iran an estimated $3 to $5 million to produce. That is expensive by Iranian standards, but it is manageable. Israel's Arrow interceptor costs between $2 and $3 million. So the cost ratio is roughly even. But here is the problem. The Arrow interceptor only works if it successfully destroys the target. If it misses, the cost was wasted. The Fattah does not need to evade every interceptor. It just needs to evade enough of them to reach the target. And with a high probability evasion rate built into the design, Iran can afford to launch these weapons, knowing that a significant percentage will get through. From an economic warfare perspective, Iran is forcing Israel to expend expensive interceptors on threats that cannot be reliably stopped. And every interceptor fired is one less available for the next wave. We have already discussed in previous videos how Israel's interceptor stockpiles are under strain. Now add hypersonic threats to that equation, and the sustainability problem becomes acute. Israel cannot maintain this level of defensive expenditure indefinitely, and Iran knows it. Now let's address the elephant in the room. Why did Iran choose Jerusalem? Tel Aviv is the larger city. It is the economic center. It has a higher population density. Strategically, hitting Tel Aviv causes more economic damage. But Jerusalem is different. Jerusalem is not just a city. It is a symbol. It is the capital that Israel claims as eternal and undivided. It is the location of the Knesset, the Supreme Court, the Prime Minister's office. It is the city that represents Israeli sovereignty more than any other. When Iran strikes Jerusalem with a weapon that cannot be stopped, the message is not just military. It is political and psychological. The message is that Israel's most sacred and defended spaces are vulnerable. And if Jerusalem can be hit, nothing is untouchable. This creates a psychological pressure that military strikes on other cities do not. It forces Israeli leadership to confront a question they have avoided for decades. What happens when your defenses fail and your most important city is under direct threat? The historical parallel here is unavoidable. During World War II, the V-2 rocket attacks on London created a similar dynamic. The V-2 was the first ballistic missile used in combat. It traveled faster than the speed of sound, gave no warning, and could not be intercepted. British defenses were powerless to stop it. The psychological impact on the population was significant, even though the actual damage was relatively limited compared to conventional bombing. The Fattah is the modern equivalent. It is a weapon that defies interception, strikes without warning, and forces the target to accept that some attacks will succeed no matter what defenses are in place. That acceptance is corrosive to morale and confidence, and Iran is betting that the cumulative psychological effect will pressure Israel toward a political settlement that Iran can accept. But there is a second dimension to this that matters just as much. Iran, striking Jerusalem with hypersonic weapons, sets a precedent that will reverberate far beyond the Middle East. Because if hypersonic weapons are now being used in active combat, every country watching this conflict is recalculating its own defensive strategy. The United States has spent decades building missile defense networks in Europe and Asia. Those networks are designed to counter ballistic threats from Russia, China, and North Korea. But if hypersonic weapons render those defenses ineffective, the entire strategic architecture needs to be rethought. China is watching this very closely. China has its own hypersonic weapons programs, including the DF-17 and the DF-ZF glide vehicle. If Iran can successfully employ hypersonics against a highly defended target like Jerusalem, China gains confidence that its own systems could penetrate American defenses in a Taiwan scenario. Russia is watching this closely. Russia has deployed hypersonic systems like the Kinzhal and the Avangard. If Iran demonstrates that hypersonics are combat effective, Russia gains leverage in any future confrontation with NATO. North Korea is watching this closely. North Korea has been testing hypersonic technology for years. If Iran proves the concept works in real combat, North Korea accelerates its own program. The use of hypersonic weapons in Jerusalem is not just a Middle Eastern development, it is a global strategic shift. And every major power is now adjusting their calculations based on what just happened. So where does Israel go from here? The options are limited and none of them are good. Option 1. Accept that some hypersonic strikes will succeed and focus on minimizing casualties through civil defense, hardened shelters, early warning systems, evacuation protocols. This does not stop the attacks, but it reduces the human cost. The problem is that no government can survive politically by telling its population to accept ongoing missile strikes on the capital. Public pressure for retaliation will be overwhelming. Option 2, attempt to destroy Iran's hypersonic launch capabilities before they can be used. This requires real-time intelligence on launcher locations and the ability to strike them preemptively. Israel has demonstrated this capability in isolated cases, but doing it consistently across Iran's entire missile infrastructure is nearly impossible. Iran operates mobile launchers from dispersed and hardened sites that are difficult to locate and harder to destroy. Option 3, escalate to a level that forces Iran to stop. This means striking targets that Iran considers red lines, nuclear facilities, leadership compounds, critical infrastructure in Tehran. The risk is that escalation at that level triggers responses that spiral beyond anyone's control. And if Israel crosses certain thresholds, Iran may deploy weapons that have been held in reserve until now. None of these options solve the fundamental problem. The problem is that offense has outpaced defense, and the weapons being used are getting more advanced and more destructive with each phase of the conflict. We are in a cycle where each side's best move is escalation, but escalation leads to outcomes that neither side can fully control, and the international community, which might normally intervene to broker a ceasefire, is paralyzed. The United States is divided internally over how much support to provide Israel. European powers are focused on their own energy and security crises. Russia and China have no interest in helping the West manage a conflict that weakens American influence in the region. So the war continues, and the weapons keep getting more capable. Here's the broader strategic lesson that every observer needs to understand. The era of reliable missile defense is over. For the past 3 decades, the assumption has been that advanced economies with sophisticated technology could build defensive systems that protect against missile threats. Billions of dollars were invested in that assumption. Entire military doctrines were built around it. The Fattah Hypersonic missile just proved that assumption wrong. No amount of investment in traditional interception technology will reliably stop maneuverable hypersonic threats. The physics do not allow it. The engagement timelines are too short. The flight paths are too unpredictable. Which means the strategic environment is shifting back to a reality that existed before missile defense became viable, a reality where the only deterrent to attack is the threat of retaliation, not the ability to intercept. That reality is inherently less stable, because it depends on both sides believing that escalation will be met with overwhelming response. And when both sides possess weapons that cannot be stopped, the temptation to strike first increases. We're entering a more dangerous phase of this conflict, and what happens in the next 48 hours will determine whether this war can be contained or whether it spirals into something far worse. Share this video with everyone who needs to understand what just changed. Iran just struck Jerusalem with hypersonic missiles that Israeli defenses could not stop. The capital of Israel, the most symbolically important city in the country, is now proven vulnerable to weapons that travel at Mach 15 and maneuver unpredictably. This is not just a tactical development. This is a strategic shift that changes the balance of power across the entire region and sends a signal to every major power on Earth. Hypersonic weapons are no longer theoretical. They are being used in combat, and no current defense system can reliably stop them. Thanks for watching. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Can Israel defend against hypersonic threats? Or is this the new reality of modern warfare? Subscribe for continued coverage, and I'll see you in the next one.